Have you ever held a sealed letter, knowing the person who sealed it is dying in the room with you, and known, without being able to explain how, that opening it is going to take something from you that you will not get back? I held one. I am 32 years old. The letter was on a side table the color of pale wood in a hospice room in Saugerties, New York, on a Thursday afternoon in March. The envelope was yellow. The corners were soft. The tape that sealed it had gone the color of old paper. The handwriting. On the front was my grandfather's. The single word written on it, in his careful pencil hand, was a word I have known my entire life. The word was my own first name. There is a price for every door you walk through. Most of the time, you do not learn its name. Sometimes the price is your name. I did not know this yet. I was about to dot. My grandfather's name was Ezra. He was 89 years old. He had been admitted to the hospice on a Monday, and he was, by Thursday afternoon, 2 days, perhaps 3 days from the end. He had spent his life as the kind of man who answered most questions and refused to. The first refusal was the question of his work. From 1962 to 1989, he had worked. He had been paid. He had supported a family. He had, in his words, been honest about it. He had refused for 62 years. To say more, the second refusal was the question of why. I had been my grandfather's family for 32 years. I had loved him. I had been loved by him. I had not known him. My grandfather, who had refused for 62 years to say where he worked, had spent the morning of his last full day asking the nurse what time it was, twice, as if a meeting was about to begin. I want to be careful with what I tell you. It happened. The afternoon I am about to describe lasted, by the clock on the hospice wall, 4 hours and 41 minutes. I have been carrying it for 14 months. There is a list of 7 names sealed in a fireproof box in my own basement. Now, I have not opened the box since the afternoon I am about to describe. I do not know whether I will. I do not know what it is to keep the names. I keep them. This is the part I have to be careful with. The hospice was a converted Victorian house at the edge of a small town. The room my grandfather had been given was on the 2nd floor. The window faced a lawn the color of old straw, and beyond the lawn, there was a low stone wall, and beyond the stone wall, there was a road, and on the road, occasionally, a car would pass, and each time a car passed, the light through the window would shift, and on his bed my grandfather would slightly turn his head, as if a thing he was waiting for might be in the car, and then a moment later he would settle again, having decided it was not. The room had a chair for a visitor. The chair was upholstered in the soft green fabric that had the slight oily sheen of fabric that has been sat in by many people across many years. There was a side table beside the chair. The side table held a glass of water with a paper straw, a small bowl of mince my grandfather did not eat, a pair of his reading glasses, a worn paperback by a Polish writer he had loved his entire life, and the envelope. The envelope had been on the side table since my grandfather had been admitted on Monday. He had brought it himself in a brown leather portfolio, which my Uncle Jonas had carried to the hospice in his car. Jonas had set the portfolio on the bedside table on Monday afternoon. My grandfather had taken the envelope out of the portfolio, placed it on the side table, and said, in the voice he had always used for things that could not be discussed, "This stays here." My uncle had not asked what it was. My mother, Miriam, had not asked what it was. I had not asked what it was. I had been raised, the way our family had all been raised, to recognize the voice my grandfather used when a thing could not be discussed, and to leave the thing alone. The voice was not unkind. It was not sharp. It was the voice of a man who had decided long ago that some questions were a kindness only when they were not asked. I should tell you who he was. He was born in the United States in 1935 to parents who had come from a small village in Latvia. In 1929, He grew up in the textile district of Lawrence, Massachusetts. He was 27 years old when his job, the job he never named, began. In 1962, he retired from the job in 1989 at the age of 54. From 1989 until his admission to the hospice, he had been a private man, a husband for 41 years to my grandmother Hannah, a father of 2, a grandfather of 5, a reader of long novels in 3 languages, a maker of bookshelves, a slow walker. In the woods behind his house, a man who attended weddings and funerals on time, a man who refused to be photographed at any of them, a man who said grace at our table without using the word God. The village in Latvia, when I asked about it as a child, was the only thing he would describe in detail. He could tell you the names of 3 rivers, 2 of which I have never been able to find on a map. He could tell you the smell of the bread his grandmother had made on Friday mornings, which was, he said, a smell that did not exist anywhere else in the world. He could tell you the names of the 4 families on his street. He could tell you which of those families had not survived the war. He had a memory for the village that was so detailed and so unsentimental that I understood, by the time I was 12, that he had given me the village as a substitute for the rest. The village was the part of his life he was permitted to remember in front of us. The rest he kept somewhere else. He and Hannah had been married in 1953. He had met her at a public library in Boston, where she had been a librarian and he had been a young man with a card. He had asked her as a first question whether the library had any books in Latvian. She had not. He had asked her as a second question what she was reading. She had told him. He had read the book she was reading, returned the next week, and asked her what she thought of it. They had been married 8 months later. They had loved each other, by the standards of long marriages, very plainly. He had not, in my hearing, ever said her name without slowing slightly. All 27 years of it had taken him out of the house twice a month. The first Monday of each month, he would drive to the post office in town. He would collect a manila envelope. He would drive home. He would go to his study in the basement, and he would close the door for an hour. He would emerge. He would, the next afternoon, take a longer walk than usual. The second Wednesday of each month, the deposit would arrive at the bank. That was the pattern. We had grown up around the pattern without ever asking what was inside the pattern. The pattern had been, to my mother and my uncle, the shape of his presence. They had no other shape for him. They did not know what was missing because the pattern had filled the space the missing thing might have made. When I was 9 years old, he taught me chess. He taught me by losing on purpose for 2 years, and then, one Saturday afternoon when I was 11, beating me in 7 moves and saying, "Asterisk, now you have learned the only lesson that matters. Be precise." Asterisk, he taught me chess at the kitchen table. In his house, on a board that was older than I was. The pieces were heavy in a way new pieces are not. He held each piece between his thumb and his first 2 fingers. He never moved a piece without first having moved it in his head. After he had moved a piece, he would set it down and immediately fold his hands in his lap, as if to make sure he could not change his mind. He was teaching me, in those 2 years of losing on purpose, not to play chess, but to make decisions. The chess was the surface. The decision-making was the work. I have understood since the afternoon at the hospice that the decision-making was also a rehearsal. He had been teaching me slowly to be a person who would one day know what to do with the envelope on the side table. When I was 18, he refused to attend my high school graduation. He sent a letter. The letter contained 1 line. Asterisk, be precise. Love your grandfather. My mother did not understand the refusal. I never asked him to explain it. I had begun by then to understand his voice for things that could not be discussed. When I was 26, my grandmother died. He grieved without speaking. He sat at the kitchen table for the better part of a year. The afternoon I drove up. From the city to sit with him in the spring after she had died, he said only, "Asterisk, you are precise. Hannah would have liked the way you have grown into precision. Asterisk, and then he made tea. I have spent 14 months trying to find a single sentence. That captures the man my grandfather was. I have not found it. The closest I have come is, he was a man who knew the weight of a thing he had not said. That afternoon, in the hospice, I had been at his bedside since just before noon. The afternoon nurse was a woman in her 50s named Frances. Frances had soft hands and soft shoes and a name tag that read asterisk Frances Dazoo. RN. Asterisk. She came in every 40 minutes to check his vitals and to refresh the water in his glass. He liked her. He had told me on Tuesday, asterisk, Frances is good. She does not pretend. Asterisk, he had asked Frances the time at 12:40. 12:41, she had said. He had nodded. He had asked her again at 1:23. 1:23. She had said. He had nodded again. I had said, asterisk, Grandpa, do you want a watch? I can find you a watch. He had said, no, the asking is the watch. I had said, asterisk, Thursday, March 7th, 2024, asterisk, slightly worried. The third time. My grandfather had closed his eyes for a moment and then opened them and said, asterisk, it is the right day, good. I had said, what is the right day? He had said, you will see. Asterisk Frances had come back into the room a few minutes later, with a small pulse oximeter on her finger, the way she came in every 40 minutes. She had checked his oxygen. She had recorded the number on a clipboard. She had asked him gently whether he was comfortable. He had said, asterisk, yes, dear, thank you. Man who had been raised to be polite to everyone who worked. The door had closed. I had sat with my grandfather for the better part of an hour, in silence while he watched the light through the window move slowly, from one part of the wall to another. He had not, in that hour, asked Frances the time again. He had not asked me what day it was again. He had been, I came to understand much later, waiting for the light to be at a particular angle. He had been waiting for the afternoon to settle. I do not know how he knew when the afternoon had settled. I think it was a thing his body knew, the way a body knows the weight of a snowstorm before the first flake has fallen. At 10 minutes past 2, my grandfather asked me to close the door. I closed the door. I sat back down in the green chair. He looked at the envelope on the side table. He looked at me. The careful pencil hand voice of a man who had decided to be precise. Asterisk, I am going to tell you something I have not told anyone. Not your grandmother, not your mother, not your uncle, not your father, not your brother, not anyone. I am going to tell you because I need help with one thing, and you are the one I am asking. Okay, Grandpa. He said, from 1962 until 1989, I had a job. The job was a single thing. I will tell you the thing. The thing was that I received names. Asterisk, he paused. He took a small sip of water through the paper straw. He said, asterisk, people sent me names. I kept them. I did not act on them. I did not speak of them. I kept them. That was the job. I said, who sent them? He said, I do not know. I said, you worked for someone for 27 years and you do not know who. He said, I was hired through a letter. The letter came when I was 27. I was working at that time at a small printing shop in Boston. The letter offered the job. The letter described the pay. The letter listed 5 rules. The letter asked for a yes or a no. I sent back a yes. The first envelope contained one name. I said, what was the name? He said, I will not tell you that. I said, how were you paid? He said, the pay came through 3 different banks across the 27 years. The first bank was in Boston until 1968. The second bank was in Hartford from 1968 to 1981. The third bank was in Albany from 1981 to 1989. Deposits were always on the second Wednesday of the month. The amount was the same for the first 10 years and increased twice. In 1972 and again in 1984, he named the amounts. They were not large. My grandfather had been careful. He said, the instructions came in on the first Monday of every month. They came in plain manila envelopes. They had no return address. The names were typed inside on small slips of paper. That was in 1973. I remember that month. I said, what was special about 1973? He said, I do not know. I never knew. I have, at times, looked at the news from the spring of 1973 to see if I could find a thing that might have explained 6 names. I never found a thing I could be certain of. The world is always in the middle of explaining itself. The world has, in any given spring, 6 dozen explanations for why 6 names might have moved at the same time. I learned, after a while, not to look for the explanation. The looking was a different rule I made up for myself, and the looking did not help. I said, did the 6 names that month, were they together somehow? A family? A village? Said the names were 6 different first names. The cities beside the names were 6 different cities. The years of birth were not close to each other. There was no obvious tie, I have wondered. I have not been able in 51 years to make the 6 names into a single thing. Maybe they were 6 things. Maybe one of the rules of the work was that I would never know whether the names were 6 things or 1 thing. I think this was in the end the largest part of the work. The work was not the keeping. The work was the not knowing whether what I kept was 1 thing or many. I said. What did the rules say? He said, the rules said, do not open the envelopes after they are filed. Do not speak of the names. Do not investigate the names. Do not pass the names to anyone. Do not refuse a name. The rules said, if a duplicate arrives, return the duplicate to the post office box on the front of the envelope. Do not keep duplicates. The rules said, at the end of each year, file the year. Begin a new file. He paused. He looked at the envelope. He said, There was a 6th thing the letter said, but it was not a rule. It was a sentence. The sentence said, the keeping is the work. I have thought about that sentence for 62 years. The sentence has, at different times in my life, meant different things. When I was 28, it meant the names. When I was 40, it meant the safe. When I was 60, it meant the silence I had agreed to. When I was 80, I began to think. It meant me. I think now, on this last day, that the sentence may have meant nothing in particular, and may have been a note from someone who knew that anyone who took the job would, at intervals across his life, need a sentence to think about. I think they sent the sentence for my sake. I think they were, in their way, kind. I have no other evidence that they were kind. I have only the sentence and the way this sentence has carried me. I said, where are the names now? He said. In a fireproof safe in my basement. The combination is in my desk drawer. The desk is yours when the time comes. Your mother does not want it. Your uncle has too many. The names are in the safe. I said, all of them? He said, all of them but one. He looked at the envelope. He said, that one is on the side table. The afternoon had begun to shift. The light through the window had gone from white to something. The color of pale honey. Francis had come in once and gone out again, and the door was closed again, and we were alone. And my grandfather was looking at me as if he had been preparing to look at me this way for a very long time. I said, Grandpa, why are you telling me this now? He said, because the envelope on the side table is the one I never filed. I have carried it for 35 years. I think it was sent to me because they knew I would not file it. I think they were finished with me And the last name was a thing for me to do, not a thing to keep. I did not do it. I have not, in 35 years, decided what to do with it. I am asking you to help me decide. I said, what if I cannot decide? He said, you will be able to decide. The list will tell you. I said, grandfather, did you ever open one? He looked at me for a long time. He said, once. In 1976. I will tell you about that next. Asterisk. He paused. He drank a small sip of water. He looked at the envelope. He said, asterisk. I have wanted for 48 years to tell someone what happened in 1976. I have come close twice. Once, in 1981, I sat across the table from your grandmother in our kitchen and almost told her. I did not tell her. I think she knew there was a thing I had almost told her. She did not press. She poured me another cup of tea. She said, whatever it is, you should keep it if it is yours to keep. I have wondered, since she died, whether she meant the keeping in the way I had meant it. I think she did. I think she had been keeping a thing of her own that she never told me. I never asked. The asking would have been, between us, the same as breaking a different rule. He said, the second time was at your high school graduation. I had not gone. I had sent a letter. I had been alone in the house. I had been thinking about you, walking across the stage in your gown, and I had thought, this is the moment. This is what I should tell someone. My granddaughter is becoming a person who can hold a thing. I did not tell anyone that day either. The day passed. I made dinner alone. I waited for your grandmother to come home from the ceremony. I have wondered sometimes whether the not telling that day was a different choice than the not telling all the other days. I do not think it was. I think the not telling was a habit by then, and the habit had become in some part of me, the love. The thing he told me about 1976, he told me slowly. He told me with the precision of a man who had rehearsed the telling in his head for 48 years and had not, before this afternoon, ever said it aloud. He said, asterisk, in 1976, in the spring. An envelope came in that was slightly heavier than the others. I do not mean by much. Maybe the weight of one extra slip of paper. Maybe the weight of a slightly thicker ink. I noticed it when I picked it up at the post office. I carried it home in the way I always carried them, in the inner pocket of my jacket. I sat at my desk in the basement. I opened the outer envelope. I removed the slips of paper. There were 2 slips. There was one name on each slip. I did not open the safe yet, because I had not yet read the names. The rule was that I did not read them. I filed them. I filed them in the order they came. That was the rule. That was the work. He paused. He said, I read them. Asterisk. He paused again. He looked for a moment, past me at the window. He said, asterisk. I want to be precise about the reading. I did not decide to read them. I had been precise for 14 years by that morning, and the precision had become by then the way I lived. I want to tell you that the reading was a small slip of the precision, that my eyes had moved before I had told them not to. I cannot tell you that. The reading was not an accident. I had wanted to read them. I had wanted, all those years, to read at least one. I had been, on that spring morning in 1976, tired in a way I had not been tired before. I had been 41 years old. I had been doing the work for 14 years. I had been a place names did not go for 14 years. I think I wanted on morning to be a person again instead of a place. I read them because I was tired. I have not, in 48 years, been able to find a more honest reason than that. He said, I read both names. I sat with them for 48 hours. I did not act on them. I did not call anyone. I did not write anyone. I did not tell your grandmother. I did not, in those 48 hours, sleep. On the third morning, I put both slips into the safe with the rest of that year's slips. I closed the safe. I did not open another envelope after reading for the next 13 years. I said, "Whose names were they?" He said, "I will tell you one of them. The other I will not tell you. The one I will tell you is this. The first slip had a man's name. He was a man I had met once at a wedding in Hartford in 1971. He was a friend of a friend. We had spoken for about 10 minutes. I had liked him. He was a teacher. He was kind to children. He had a wife. He had a small son. He lived in Vermont. He was, in 1976, 44 years old. I said, "What did you do?" He said, "Nothing. I did nothing for 48 years. I have wondered every day whether reading the name made any difference to him." I checked in 2003. He had died of natural causes that year, age 71, in a hospital in Vermont. I checked again in 2010. There had been no unusual circumstances. He had had a long life. He had had grandchildren. I think the answer is, it made no difference. I think the rule against reading was not a rule about consequences. I think the rule against reading was a rule about the keeper, not the kept. I said, "What about the second slip?" He said, "I will not tell you about the second slip. I am sorry, the second slip is the part one I'm keeping. I have been keeping it for 48 years. The second slip is, I think, the only part of the work I will not give to you. There are things a person can carry only by not naming them, and there are things a person can stop carrying only by naming them. The second slip is the first kind. It will go with me." Asterisk I did not press. I had been raised to recognize the voice. He was using, he said, asterisk. The 48 hours after I read the 2 slips were not a single thing. The first hour, I was angry. I was angry at the names, at the people who had sent them, at myself, at your grandmother for being asleep upstairs, while I sat with the slips at my desk. The second hour, I was afraid. The third hour, I was bargaining. The fourth hour, I was very calm. The calm was worse than the anger. The calm was the calm of a person who has decided to do nothing and is rehearsing the doing nothing as a kind of action. The next 44 hours were the calm. I sat at my desk for parts of those hours. I made coffee. I did not eat. I went upstairs once to look at your grandmother sleeping, and to look at your mother and your uncle in their rooms, and to come back down. I did not, in any of those hours, sleep. On Sunday morning, just before dawn, I went outside and stood on the porch and watched the sky go from black to gray. I went back into the basement. I put both slips in the safe. I closed the safe. I came up the stairs. Hannah was in the kitchen. She poured me a cup of coffee. She did not ask. I think she knew by my hands that the weekend had been bad. I think she did not ask because asking would have meant naming a thing that I would have had to lie about. I think she chose that morning, the keeping. I have thought about that morning every Sunday since. I said, "Grandfather, what does that mean?" He said, "I think it means that what was being kept was the keeper. I do not know whether the names mattered. I know that the keeping mattered. I know it mattered to the people who hired me. I know it mattered to me. The 48 hours after I read those 2 names was the worst weekend of my life. I do not say that lightly. I lived through 1968. I lived through your grandmother's first cancer in 1989. I have buried 2 siblings. The 48 hours of having read those 2 names was worse than any of those. It was not the names themselves. It was the way the keeping changed once I had looked. I had not understood before then what the keeping was. I said, "What was it?" He said, "The keeping was the place the names did not go. I had been a place. After I read them, the names had gone somewhere. Into me, perhaps. I do not know. The instructions had been precise, and I had been a precise man. And once I broke the precision, I could not return to it. I could only refuse to break it again. So I did not break it again for 13 years. Asterisk, there's a price for every door you walk through. He did not say it the way I have been saying it to you. He said it more or less. He said, asterisk, you pay for what you keep. Sometimes you do not know what the keeping cost you until you let it go. I said, you let it go now? He said, I am letting it go now, with your help. Asterisk, the room was quiet for a long minute. I could hear, through the window, the small flat sound of a single car passing on the road. I could hear, from the hallway, the soft rhythm of Francis's shoes on the linoleum and the quiet metal of a cart. I could hear my grandfather's breath, slower than my own, even deliberate, the breath of a man who was not yet finished. I could hear, more than anything, the room itself, the way a room sounds when it is paying attention. I had not, before that afternoon, known that a room could be paying attention. I think I have known it every afternoon since. After a moment, Frances came in. She brought 2 small cups of tea on a saucer. She set the saucer on the side table. She did not look at the envelope. She said, asterisk, the chaplain is downstairs. Do you want him to come up? My grandfather said, not today. Tomorrow maybe. Asterisk. Frances nodded and left. The door closed. We were alone again. The tea steamed. The tea was a black tea, plain, with no milk and no sugar, the way my grandfather had always taken it. The cup he was given was the small white cup of a hospice, with a faint blue line near the rim and a small chip on the saucer. He held the cup in 2 hands. He drank it slowly. He set it down. The cup made a small clean sound against the saucer when he set it down. The sound was, in the quiet of the room, a louder sound than it should have been. The afternoon had reached the hour when small sounds carried. My grandfather hummed a few bars of a song I had not heard him hum since I was small. It was a song my grandmother had liked. It was in a language I did not speak. I did not ask what the song was. I had stopped asking years before, things he could not say. He drank a small sip of his tea. He said, asterisk, there is one name I have never filed. It is the one in the envelope. I am ready to tell you about it. He said, the envelope arrived in the last week of November 1989. It was the last envelope. I knew it was the last envelope because the next month, December, no instructions came. I waited. None came in January. None came in February. The pay had stopped on December the 8th, the second Wednesday. I understood that the work was finished. Asterisk. He said, asterisk, the envelope had only 1 slip of paper inside. There was 1 name typed on the slip. I carried this slip into the basement. I was about to put it in the safe. I stopped. I did not put it in the safe. I do not know why I stopped. I have thought about this for 35 years. The closest I have come is this. I thought before I filed it, this is the last one. I should hold it for 1 minute. I should let myself feel that this is the last one. So I held it for 1 minute. He said, at the end of the minute, I read. The name, he said. I did not file it. I have not filed it. I sealed it in a new envelope. I wrote on the front, in pencil, the only word I had ever written on the front of any of them. I put the envelope in my desk. It has been in my desk for 35 years. I have moved it 3 times. Once when we sold the house in Lawrence. Once when we moved to the place in Saugerties. Once when your grandmother died and I rearranged the desk. The envelope has been with me. I have not opened it again. I am asking you now to open it. I said, why me? He said, asterisk, because the name on the slip is yours. Because I have wanted, since you were 6 years old and corrected my grammar at the dinner table, to be the kind of grandfather who could give you a precise gift. Because I think the gift, in the end, is not the envelope. The gift is the trust that you will know what to do with the envelope. I am asking you because you are the only person I know who is precise enough to do the thing that needs to be done, and old enough to refuse. If you decide to refuse, you can refuse. I want you to know that you can refuse. I said, "What happens if I refuse?" He said, "Nothing. I will go to sleep without it being done. The envelope will go on. You will have it. You will decide on a different afternoon what to do with it. The work has not had a deadline in 35 years. There is no reason it should have one today. I am only telling you today, because today is the day I have left to tell you." Asterisk, I looked at the envelope. The light through. The window had gone from honey to a yellow that was almost orange. The afternoon had deepened. I could hear, from the hallway, 2 nurses speaking in low voices about a patient in another room. I said, asterisk, "Grandfather, what is the name on the front of the envelope?" He said, "You know what it is. It is yours." I said, "What does that mean?" Asterisk, he saw it, asterisk. "It means I have been carrying your name in a sealed envelope in my desk for 35 years. Your name was on the slip that arrived in November 1989. You were not yet born. You were not born for another 6 years. I have carried it. I am tired of carrying it. I want you to open it. I want you to read the list. I want you to do one thing. After you do the one thing, I will go to sleep." I said, "What is the one thing?" He said, "You will know." I said, "Grandfather, what if I do not know?" He said, "You will know. The list will tell you." He turned his head slightly toward the window. He said, "On the windowsill, there's a small ceramic ashtray. Your uncle brought it last week. It is from my desk. There is a box of matches on the windowsill beside the ashtray. There's a slip of paper. I have prepared. I am sorry I did not prepare you sooner. I did not know which day it would be." Asterisk, I looked at the ashtray on the windowsill. It was a small ashtray, the color of old butter with a single chipped edge. I had seen it on his desk for 32 years. I had not, until that afternoon, known what it was for. I picked up the envelope. I held it for a long time. I want to tell you, before I tell you what I read, that I had 3 thoughts in the time I was holding the envelope. The first was that I had loved my grandfather without ever knowing him. The second was that the not knowing had been the form the loving had taken. The third was that the door I was about to walk through was not the door I had walked into the room through, and that I would not, when the afternoon was over, walk back out through the same door I had walked in through. I had not, before that afternoon, understood what a door was. I think I have understood it every afternoon since. I held the envelope for what was, by the clock on the wall, about 10 seconds. It felt longer. It felt like an hour. I will tell you what I did, in order, because the order is the only way I can hold the memory now without it dissolving into a single image. First, I looked at my grandfather. He was looking at me. His eyes were clear. He nodded once without smiling. Second, I lifted the envelope to my lap. I held it in 2 hands. I felt through the paper, the small stiffness of a folded piece of inside dash paper. Third, I broke the tape with my thumbnail. The tape made a soft sound, the sound of dry paper coming apart, and then a softer sound, the sound of the envelope opening itself slightly when the seal had let go. Fourth, I removed the inside paper. It was a single sheet, folded once. The paper was white. The fold was sharp. The paper had been folded by my grandfather in 1989 and not unfolded since. Fifth, I unfolded the paper. Sixth, I read the list. There were 7 names on the list. They were typed. The typeface was the typeface of a manual typewriter from the 1980s, with the slight unevenness that tells you each character has been struck by a separate hand. The 7 names were in 7 separate lines. Beside each name, in a small column, was a city. Beside each city, in a smaller column, was a 4-digit number that I understood after a moment. To be a year of birth. I read the names one at a time. The first name was Bay, with a city I did not recognize, born in 1934. The second name was Lie, with a city in France, born in 1941. The third name was Caleb, with a city in Pennsylvania, born in 1949. The fourth name was Esther, with a city in Israel, born in 1952. The fifth name was Anders, with a city in Sweden, born in 1958. The sixth name was Yusuf, with a city in Egypt, born in 1972. The seventh name was a name I knew. The seventh name was the name on the front of the envelope. The seventh name was mine. The city was the city in which I had been born, in 1991, in the spring, 6 years after the list had been typed. I had been my grandfather's family for 32 years. The seventh name on the list was mine. I want to tell you what the room did. In that moment, the room did nothing. The light did not change. The afternoon, on the other side of the window, continued. I could hear, very faintly, a single bird. I could hear, more faintly, the ticking of the clock on the hospice wall. I could not, for those 10 seconds, hear my grandfather's breath, because he was holding it. I looked at him. He was awake. He was watching my face. He had been watching my face the whole time I had been reading. He said, very quietly, asterisk, I am sorry. I did not know what to do with it. I have been waiting for you to be old enough to decide for yourself. I said, what is the small thing? He said, write a name on the slip of paper. Light the slip. Watch it burn in the ashtray. Just one. Your choice. Asterisk. I looked at the 7 names. I thought of B, who I did not know, born 90 years ago in a city I had never visited. I thought of Lee, born during a war. I thought of Caleb, who would now be 75. I thought of Esther, of Anders, of Yusuf. Each of them was a stranger. Each of them was somewhere in the world, alive or not alive. A person who did not know my grandfather had carried their name in a sealed envelope in a desk drawer for 35 years. I thought of myself that I was not a stranger. I was the only name on the list I knew. I have not, in 14 months, found a way to explain the calm with which I made the choice. I think the calm was my grandfather's, transferred. He had carried the envelope for 35 years. He had carried it. I came to understand in the way one carries a child's hand across a busy intersection. The carrying had been the work. The carrying had been the love. He had been, by the rules of his job, a place names did not go. By the act of holding this one name without filing it, he had made my name a place that could be returned to. I picked up the slip of paper from the windowsill. I picked up the pen from the side table. I wrote a name on the slip. The name I wrote was a name. I will not tell you which name. I will tell you only this. I wrote it carefully. I wrote it the way my grandfather had taught me to be precise. I lit the match. I dropped the slip into the ashtray. I watched it burn for the count of 3. The slip turned to ash. The ash settled at the bottom of the ashtray, on top of the chip. The match in my fingers had gone out. I set it on the saucer beside the T-dot. My grandfather closed his eyes. He said, asterisk, thank you. He said, I am going to sleep now. Asterisk, he went to sleep. There's a price for every door you walk through. Most of the time, you do not learn its name. I learned its name. I have not, since that afternoon, said my own name aloud the way I used to say it. I do not know whether anyone has noticed. I do not think anyone has. I notice it every time I introduce myself to a stranger. He died at 11:42 that night. Francis called me at 11:46. I was at the small inn down the road. I was awake. I had been awake. I had not, since the afternoon, been able to find sleep, and I think, looking back, I was waiting for the call. The funeral was the following Tuesday. My Uncle Jonas spoke. My mother Miriam read a poem in the language my grandfather's parents had spoken in the village in Latvia. My brother Caleb, yes, that was a coincidence of the list I noticed. My grandfather had never explained. I did not ask anyone. My brother Caleb did not speak. He had loved my grandfather quietly. He stood at the back in a coat that was too thin and held my mother's hand. My mother asked me, after the funeral, what my grandfather and I had talked about. In the hospice that Thursday, I said asterisk. He told me about his work. Asterisk, my mother said. Asterisk, what was the work? I said. He said it was honest. My mother said, was it? I think so. Asterisk, she did not ask again. I did not tell her about the list. I do not know whether I will. I think sometimes that I will. I think more often that the keeping is the work, and that I have been hired the way my grandfather was hired, by an envelope I cannot see, by an instruction I have already accepted. The remaining 6 names are sealed in a fireproof box in my own basement now. The box has a combination. The combination is in my desk drawer. I have not opened the box since the afternoon I'm telling you about. I do not know what it is to keep them. I keep them. I will tell you, before I stop talking, the small things that have changed since that afternoon. They are very small. I do not want to make them larger than they are. I used to dream every night. I dream now perhaps once a week. I used to remember the names of people I had met once at parties. I do not now always remember them. I used to introduce myself to strangers in a particular way I had used since college, with a particular emphasis on the second syllable of my name, and I have not, since the afternoon, been able to find that emphasis again. I do not know whether anyone has noticed. I think nobody has. I notice it. I notice the small absence the way a person notices a missing step on a staircase they have walked for years. The staircase is the same staircase. The walking is the same walking. There is a step that is not there. If you have ever felt this, felt that something quiet has changed inside you and that you cannot, on a Tuesday afternoon, name what it is, write it down. Tell someone or do not. The naming, I have come to think, is its own kind of choosing. Some doors close when you walk through them, some close when you walk past them. The door I walked through that afternoon has not closed. I think it may close only when I am gone.